This is Michael Woodward, and this is episode 237 of jumbleThink.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to jumbleThink, where we interview amazing entrepreneurs about their journey of turning dreams and ideas into reality. Along the way, we're going to share some tips on how you can turn your own dreams and ideas into reality too. On Friday, we are back for new guest interviews. We've got some great people lined up for you. You're not going to want to miss that episode. Whether you're new to jumbleThink or a longtime listener, you can catch all of our past episodes by checking out the jumbleThink podcast on your favorite place to listen to podcasts. For iTunes or for Apple Podcasts, simply go to jumblethink.com/iTunes. And for Spotify, jumblethink.com/Spotify. Now let's jump into today's episode. Hey there, welcome to jumbleThink. My name is Michael Woodward. I am your host. We have a fun episode lined up for you today. We are continuing something different. It's something we started last Friday. Today's the last time we're going to do it, probably for a very long time, and it's a look back at some of our past guests. Now that we're on radio and we have a lot more listeners on the podcast, there's some great episodes that many people never heard, and maybe they haven't gotten back to check those out. We wanted to bring segments of those to give you a little taste of what you've missed with the jumbleThink show in today's episode. We're bringing on 3 guests. The first guest is a guy named Jeffrey Shaw. He wrote a book called Lingo, which is all about understanding how to discover your ideal customer and speak their secret language. Super fun episode. We're also going to bring on Chad Fry. He is heading up a lot of movement in the STEM and STEAM space. We actually have a new guest coming up in the next couple of weeks that's going to go deeper into the world of STEM, but we wanted to continue that conversation today and share a little bit from that episode. And then we're going to finish up today's show with Jonathan Grabowski. He is heading up a really innovative startup that helps people connect with their graphic design. They're one of the sponsors of the jumbleThink show, but we wanted to give you a little bit more into their story. So those are the 3 guests that we're going to be having segments from their past episodes. You can go back and check the full episode out, and I would highly recommend that for you. Before we get rolling on today's episode, we want to take a moment and thank our sponsors for today's episode. They are Penji and OpportunityInChina.com. Now, OpportunityInChina.com can help you both learn and teach abroad in places like China. They're doing really cool stuff, and if you've ever thought about learning abroad, you got to go check them out. And if you have a bachelor's degree and you want to go teach English, there's some great opportunities around the world. So go on over to OpportunityInChina.com to check out what they are doing. And our friends over at Penji, they offer unlimited graphic design service at a low monthly fixed rate. That's unlimited graphic design every month for all of your needs. We've been working with them for the last couple months to help with some things we're doing here at jumbleThink. It has been a great experience. I recommend that you go check them out. Head on over to Penji, PENJI.com. Use the code JUMBLE to get 15% off your first month. Our first guest on today's episode is Jeffrey Shaw. He's been a leading portrait photographer for over 30 years. He's turned that knowledge into a book called Lingo, Discovering Your Ideal Customers' Secret Language and Make Your Business Irresistible. Jeffrey's been a friend of ours for a while, but he is doing really cool stuff. You should check him out. He has appeared on The Oprah Show, CBS News, in the O Magazine, People Magazine, and New York Family Magazine. He's been doing a lot of cool stuff with his portrait photography for years. All right, let's jump into our conversation with Jeffrey Shaw. Jeffrey, how are you doing today?
I'm awesome, Michael. How are you doing?
A little sick, so for those who listen often, they're going to notice that my words sound a little different. My voice sounds a little weird, and for that I apologize, and hopefully I won't stumble through words that my nose knocks out the letters in them. So it is so good to have you on the podcast. I've been diving into your book, which we're going to talk about. Super excited about that book and talking about that. You've been on a journey, though, and you're writing this book from your last couple of years of experience, but you didn't start by being a business coach or a speaker or even a podcast host. Your journey starts much before that in the world of photography. When did your passion for photography start?
You know, it's always been there, I guess. You know, I mean, as a little kid, my father played with it as a hobby. So there's a dark room in the house. So I first was intrigued by the chemicals, you know, back in the day when we had dark rooms, the mixing of chemicals made stuff, but then I ran out of stuff to print. So I started shooting. So it just sort of evolved. I came from a family that they never talked about higher education or direction, or it was just sort of like, I don't know that they knew I was around. So, you know, a lot of people collapse under too much pressure from your parents. I actually wished I had a little pressure because there was no direction. And so, you know, I had no career direction whatsoever. And I think because of that, though, it actually brought out a natural sense of entrepreneurship for me. I started selling eggs door to door when I was 14 years old. I lived in a country town, and so I sold eggs door to door. And I just tried to figure out, how do I find my own way? So I started out as a photographer. I went to photography school, which was only a 10-month program because I still didn't understand how that could be a career. I was good at it. I was very good at photographing people, and it caught on pretty quickly. I mean, I got a lot of awards and accolades early on as a 20-year-old or so, and then finished education and went into business as a professional portrait photographer at 20 years old. And, you know, a few years of struggle, ended up photographing, you know, the most affluent families in the United States, photographing their families and their children, and at their vacation homes and yachts, and going on their European vacations and doing their family portraits. And so, you know, most definitely a journey from, you know, in so many ways, you know, on one hand, growing up very lower middle class, but ending up photographing the wealthiest people in the United States, going from choosing photography as a hobby because it removed me from the world. It kept me in, you know, I was extremely shy all the way up into my mid-20s. So it kept me safe from the world. I could hang out in a dark room and you could hide behind a camera, but then, you know, I was good at something. So next thing I know, I was on the stage, right? I was suddenly being thrown forward, you know, mid-20s going to A-lister Christmas parties for clients of wealthy people and politicians and celebrities. And so, yeah, it's most definitely been a journey. And along the way, the biggest journey of all, I guess you could say, is that I made a super successful business out of something that probably never should have been. You know, I mean, there's no logical reason to be successful at the level I was as a one-person portrait photographer. Yeah. And so the journey became, people started coming to me, well, how did you do that? So I started coaching photographers on my techniques. And then that, of course, unfolded to realizing this has nothing to do with photography. This is about the journey I've been on is figuring out how to turn what I refer to as an uncommon entrepreneur, like how to turn any business out of the ordinary into something successful, because it requires a whole different, it's not a transactional experience. It's a very relational based business. And that's what I excel at. And that's the basis of the book Lingo. That's the ideas. This book, although just coming out, the fact of the matter is it's the story of my life. I just didn't, it was so close to me, I didn't know it. I didn't see it until through enough conversations, I realized this is what I need to teach.
Well, you mentioned there that one of the things about photography is, and even in how you talked about as a child growing up in your family, you talked about you were kind of always unnoticed, if you will. You know, you're behind the camera, so you try to blend in, you try to disappear so people feel natural in a lot of those settings. You are a child and you feel like, you know, do they even know that I'm here sometimes, that kind of thing. And now you've been in this journey of pivoting into the limelight, if you will, where people are seeking you out. They're asking these questions, whether it's about photography or whether it's even about the message and how you market and communicate. How has that changed your perspective of your own value?
Love the question. Yeah, and in my own mind, I'm still not visible, right? That's the thing, right? I still carry the old baggage. I still think I'm invisible. You know, not entirely. I can see evidence that, you know, I get noticed. But that's such a great question, Michael, because in my podcast, Creative Warriors, at the end, I do a series of 4 discovery round questions. And the first question is always the same. The other questions change up, but the first question is the same, which is what drives you crazy? And I ask that of my guests because it's always it's predictable to hear how what drives people crazy with a problem they want to solve in the world very closely relates to the journey they're on.
Yeah.
And the path that they chose, the career that they chose. And so what drives me crazy is seeing people put in boxes. Okay. Particularly entrepreneurs. The fact that, what drives me crazy is seeing creative people and entrepreneurs given really bad old-fashioned niche marketing type of business advice that no longer works, and it doesn't work for anybody that thinks outside the box. People that think outside the box, you don't want to put into the niche box. So what drives me crazy is that this, the way people are put into a box. So it is. So my objective, if you will, as a business coach is to help businesses be more visible. And I want the whole point of Lingo is to help entrepreneurs build a business that is highly visible to their ideal customer. So it's the exact same thing. It's like, while I have this fear, if you will, or this feeling of being invisible, I'm trying to solve that in other people. And that's where the satisfaction comes. So the satisfaction comes from making my coaching clients and the people that will read Lingo, helping them be highly visible, of course, is deeply satisfying to me because it's almost self-healing.
That's really, really cool. You're talking about, niches and that traditional exploration of marketing by going into and saying, this is my little space that I've carved out. This is my niche within a bigger bucket, within a bigger bucket, within a bigger bucket. And you also talk a lot about the evolution of avatars as we've identified our audience. And one of the things that stood out to me as I looked through your articles on Huffington Post or read your book overview and different things like that was that you don't just look at people as avatars. Part of your story, which fascinated me, was instead of defining your avatar, you experienced your avatar. Mm-hmm. When you were 23, going to New York City, in that world of photography, trying to find out how you could stand out and create a business out of this. Can you tell us the story of when you were 23 and how experiencing your avatar instead of defining your avatar has helped set you up on the trajectory you're on today?
Beautiful. Thank you. So, and so much of it is actually said in the subtitle of the book, which I'll just recite and then I'll explain the story. So the book is, of course, called Lingo, but the subtitle is Discover the Secret Language of Your Ideal Customer and Make Your Business Irresistible. So it's this idea of secret language that I tapped into on that journey, that visit into New York City that you're speaking of. So, and again, here I was 23 years old. I'm now 53. So we're looking at 30 years later.
Wow.
And it was just a year or so ago that I actually had written another book last year. I spent all of last year writing another business book, which never got published because when it was done, it just didn't feel like the book that I was meant to put out. And I knew it and I felt it. And the editor I was working with at the time felt it. So I wound up just, putting it aside for a little bit, not knowing what I was going to do with it, and wound up getting into a conversation with another editor who immediately picked up on the story I'm going to share with you in a minute. And she said, that's the story you need to tell, and those are the lessons that entrepreneurs need. Wow. And I realized that it was the story of my life that I've lived that was so close in front of me that I couldn't see it until somebody else pointed it out. So what happened was I had, when I got out of photography school and I went back to my hometown. Now, mind you, as a photographer, I had this idea that how important it was to be a portrait photographer, that being a portrait photographer and family portraits and children were, incredibly valuable and people needed to hold on to them and hand them down from generation to generation. So I placed a very high value of importance on this. So was going to try to charge amount of money that was proportionate to how important I felt it was. And unfortunately, the town in which I grew up in, I was trying to build this business in, it was a very lower middle class town. And as one woman said to me, I don't have the luxury of worrying about my children's memories. I don't know how I'm paying my rent.
Yeah.
Right. So I realized that I was in fact speaking the wrong language. I was speaking the language of long-term and high values for handing things down to people that were worrying about today. So that let me know as like, all right, well, I need to speak to people. I need to market my business and my services to people that can afford luxury. And who are they? Well, they're affluent people. Problem was, I know nothing about affluence at that point in my life. Yeah. Absolutely nothing. So I went to the one place that I could think of, and I to this day I can't remember how I heard about it, but it's Bergdorf Goodman on Fifth Avenue, New York City.
Yeah.
Bergdorf Goodman is you're in New York. It's a one of a kind department store, seven stories high, and there's nothing else like it. And it's right in the smack of Fifth Avenue, and 95% of people that are on Fifth Avenue walk right by it and don't even notice it. They don't notice it because it's not for everybody. And that's the point, right? So, but somehow I knew the store was there, and I said, well, I'll go there. So I go to this store with this idea. To your point, I was going to experience my clients, what I understood. It's an important lesson in business in life to really acknowledge what we don't know. And what I knew that I didn't know was anything about what it meant to be rich. Yeah. So I felt it wasn't enough to know the demographics, the profile, blah, 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 all that boring stuff. Because if it's boring to me, it's going to be boring to the consumer. So I was like, well, what I need to know is, how do they think? What's their perspective? Which in lingo, I teach a 5-step process to understanding and building the secret language brand of your customers, your ideal customer. So step number 1 is perspective. So I went to Bergdorf Goodman to understand the perspective of my ideal customer, who I wanted to be my ideal customer. And what I found is that it was a world unlike anything I had seen, because I had never been around that. But I realized not only is it a world, it's one thing to be in a place that's not, familiar to you, it's different to you. It's another thing to realize that there's a whole different wavelength going on there, that this business knows how to speak to their customer, and I didn't. Yeah. So the grounding story, the crazy thing about Lingo, I think, as a book, is that I'm writing it now, but it's literally based on one afternoon 30 years ago when I learned when I realized what I learned, and then built all my businesses and other people's businesses on this one principle that I learned in this one afternoon. Key turning point moment was in the store. I only had, by the way, I had $20 with me. That's I was a poor kid. All I had was $20 with me. I was terribly inappropriately dressed. And I look back now, I'm surprised they didn't escort me out of the store. Wow. In hindsight, I kept thinking, when I was walking around and realized how inappropriately dressed I was hoping that they thought I was some rich heir who could get away looking like this. Yeah. So the only thing I could afford was this tiny candle, like this votive candle, really, really small. Because it was under $20 plus sales tax, I could get by with $20. And I asked for it to be gift wrapped because I really wanted to understand the whole process. Like, what did it feel like to be a customer here? And I observed how, this salesperson was completely not judgmental about who I was, assuming she couldn't figure it out. She couldn't figure out if I was a poor kid who didn't belong here. Was I a rich heir who, so absolutely no judgment. She treated me like I was worth $1 million, even though I was buying a $20 item. Wow. And when I asked for it to be gift wrapped, she escorted me to gift wrap. I mean, I went in there feeling like I don't belong and wound up feeling like $1 million. Wow. Right, which already told me a lot. Non-judgment. Just everybody got handled without judgment and top service. I was escorted over the gift wrap department, and I asked for it to be wrapped. This woman was in the gift wrap department, was behind like this hole in the window. Yeah. The wall, right? So I said, would you show me how to gift wrap this? And I said, I actually said to her, I'm trying to learn what rich people like. Will you show me how to gift wrap it? And she laughed. She brought me into the back room. So she's wrapping this thing, but she's putting it in tons of tissue paper, putting it into Bergdorf Goodman's signature silver metallic box. Yeah. And she wraps it up with purple ribbon, again, also their signature color. And then she stops with the most dramatic pause, Michael, that you could imagine. She looks up at me and she says, "Don't use any tape." Okay. No, exactly. I was like, okay, why is that important? And, meanwhile, I'm thinking, God, in my family, we wrap Christmas presents with newspapers and duct tape. Yeah. What do you mean don't use any tape? And so I said, why? And she said, well, because this client is very, very particular, right? So the customer is going to want to untie the ribbon, take off the box top, unfold all the tissue paper, make sure the candle is perfect before she gives it as a gift, put it all back together, and you can't tell that it was opened. Wow. And that's when in that moment I made the observation and coined the term secret language. I was like, holy cow, that's like a secret language that you would never know unless you are in sync with who you're serving. Yeah. Your ideal customer. Yeah. It's the simplest thing. But then I started, then my whole world unfolded, because not only at Bergdorf's, but then I spent months studying what it meant in how, what the perspective of was the affluent clientele. And I started noticing how things were merchandised in a very clean way. There could be volume, but everything was so innately organized. Brand names, of course, or designer names were everything. Designer names made everything look really expensive. My business wasn't in my name at that time. I immediately changed my photography business to being in my name. The pricing psychology was astonishing to me because I grew up in an environment where everything was priced down to the hundredth of a cent, $14.97 and $19.99. And, and I really, in the store like this, the prices are all rounded off.
Yeah.
It was just $50, $500, $5,000, right?
Yeah.
Just this day. I think the most fun observation I made, Michael, was that in a high-end store, you can't find a cash register.
Right.
The cash registers are like hidden behind merchandise. They're in back rooms. And I think that's really interesting in stores where you're spending the most amount of money. The transaction is less obvious. Whereas you walk into Walmart or Target, the first thing you see is a huge lineup of registers at the front door.
Yeah.
And I realized that the different languages that if you're a price conscious business, if your business model like Walmart, which is to draw forward, speak the language of cost conscious consumers, if that's your language, then you want to draw a lot of attention to the price.
Yeah.
You want to have rollback. You want to run entire ad campaigns about rollback prices.
Right.
Make the registers obvious. If you're in the high end, you don't want to talk about it. It's all very vague because that's not what it's about. It's not about the transaction of money. It's about the experience.
Yeah.
And everything in between that, every business, Target, Walmart, every business you can think of, if they're doing it right, they are speaking the secret language of the people they want to draw forward. And I feel like entrepreneurs and small businesses aren't necessarily getting this message. I'm not saying big businesses are doing it right either. Some are, some aren't. But I think it's absolutely critical for entrepreneurs and small businesses to get this because as we move forward in the world of business and in our world in general, it is going to be required. I think consumers are going to require that we know a lot more about them than their demographics and profile. We have to know their hearts and their souls before we can get into their pockets.
Right.
They're going to demand a higher standard of personal interaction because, and we have to remember, Michael, we're consumers too. We're experiencing the world that's far more automated and robotic.
Yeah.
And as the pendulum swings that way, the pendulum's also going to swing the other way where people are going to want more personal interaction. And that's what I mean about speaking the secret language, this idea of lingo, really getting into people's lingo so that they feel like you really get them.
There is much, much more to this interview. If you like what you've been hearing so far, head on over to jumbleThink.com. You can check out Season 1, Episode 93 with Jeffrey Shaw. In a moment, we'll be back to continue our recap of some of our favorite episodes in Season 1 and Season 2. We are always trying to do exciting things here at JumbleThink, and I have an event I want you to be at. I want you to join me. It's called Podcast Row. It's happening in early June in New York City. It is a 2-day exclusive event held at Stand Up New York. There are going to be 8 entrepreneurs and 6 podcasters participating daily. I'm one of those podcasters with people, other podcasters like James Alcatraz, Greg Clunas, and our friend Jeremy Slate. Each day, we're going to be interviewing entrepreneurs like you. You're going to be guaranteed to be on our show, and we're going to have those interviews with you to share them with our audience. You can also join networking opportunities. You're going to get to be a part of a 1-hour talk and question and answer with James Alcatraz, and there is an after party with more networking and a comedy show. You want to be there. I want you to be there. How can you be a part? Well, you can apply at podcast-row.com. That's podcast-row.com. So head on over, drop your application in there, and I look forward to seeing you in New York City in early June. We also want to thank our sponsors for today's episode, Penji. Penji helps startups, agencies, and marketing teams achieve more with unlimited graphic design support at one flat monthly rate. Their easy-to-use online platform pairs you with a professional designer and lets you create as many design projects as you want. Think of it as your monthly subscription to top-notch design. No contracts, no hourly billing, just fast, simple, and affordable graphic design for all of your needs. How do you get a special deal because you're a listener of JumbleThink? Well, it's easy. Head on over to Penji.com. That's PENJI.com. Use the code JUMBLE, JUMBLE, and get 15% off your first month. We also want to thank our friends over at OpportunityInChina.com for sponsoring today's episode. Have you been looking for a way to change your career or social prospect? Do you see the world around you changing and haven't quite figured out what path you should take? You are not alone in seeking opportunity. Visit OpportunityInChina.com for access to scholarships to attend university in China. Or, if you have a bachelor's degree already, OpportunityInChina.com provides access to jobs in the educational sector all across China. Now, working in China is not only often well paid, but it will place you among 1/5 of the world's population, boosting your social network, bringing you more deeply into the story of globalization, and opening up doors you never knew existed. Seize your opportunity now. Visit their website for more information at OpportunityInChina.com. By the way, they have a great podcast. Simply search for Opportunity in China Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Now let's jump back into today's episode as we continue our conversation with Chad Fry. As we are looking back at past episodes and some of our favorite guests, we are going to bring back a conversation from Chad Fry. Chad Fry is at the bleeding edge of the maker movement. Chad shares how entrepreneurs and makers are changing education through STEM and STEAM. By bringing the maker movement directly into schools, we are able to shape the next generation of innovators and influencers to think outside the box and bring new solutions to the problems they face. So here we go. Here is a bit of our conversation with Chad Fry. Our guest today is Chad Fry. I'm super excited to have him on the podcast. Chad, thanks for coming over and being on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Michael.
We are going to dive into what you're doing and how it impacts community. But first, we want to learn a little bit about you. So tell us your business name and your role at the business, and then at the larger sense, what your business does.
Sure. Okay, so my business name is Partnership Planners LLC. At least that's the legal parent company. But because we're a software company, we kind of operate under the radar, and most people would know our social enterprise effort, which is called the Foundry Makerspace. And that's really more of a public kind of engagement with local schools where we're trying to put tech into schools. So that's just a little bit of background about the company. Partnership Planners is really a project management tool that I started when I was at a college here locally called Messiah College, when I was working with community partners, and we really didn't have a way to receive really well their requests with what students were interested in doing and what faculty were trying to do with their courses. So we kind of built this thing from the ground up, and then I realized, hey, this could have some other applications, and I asserted my intellectual property rights and got them.
Okay.
And then started the company, and probably our biggest client right now is the United Way.
Okay. All right, very cool. Now, you mentioned that you have multiple facets to this. You've got the software end, and I'm assuming that's web and that kind of thing, or is it beyond that?
Well, this is a lot of database backend stuff. So this is really a form creator.
Yeah.
So what we're actually doing is trying to create an easy way for people to receive a lot of data, walk it through somewhat of a logic model as they're planning projects, and then get people to sign up for those projects and actually engage people in them and monitor that. So we're looking at impact indicators. This is a kind of a one-stop shop for a project manager who's trying to do community engagement.
Oh, wow. Wow. That sounds much more complex than what I originally thought when I was reading what you do and everything like that. So that's super cool. Now, for you, as you started the journey of transitioning from being a college student into the world of business, how did you, or when did it start, that draw to entrepreneurship and starting things and doing things instead of going out and saying, hey, I can go work at whatever corporation and fill a space? Instead, you're creating a space. So how did that journey start for you?
All right, well, I'm going to back it up a little bit.
Okay.
So I grew up in Lancaster County.
Yeah.
And I grew up on the farm.
Home of the Amish.
Home of the Amish.
All right. I'm assuming you're not Amish.
I am not Amish. No, if your listeners could see me, I've got cufflinks on.
Yep.
But yeah, grew up in Lancaster County and sold hay to the Amish.
Wow.
But my family was involved in kind of business. So have you ever heard of Turkey Hill?
Yeah. Not grocery, but gas stations.
Yeah,
and
the
mini
gas
mart
stations,
and that kind of thing. Yeah.
ice cream and tea.
Yeah.
So my great-grandfather started Turkey Hill.
Okay.
And my dad was the vice president. My grandfather ran it for many years with his brother.
Wow.
And so I grew up around business. That
Okay.
was kind of like, my background, and loved it.
Okay.
Actually, always thought I wanted to grow up and take over the family business. Then I felt really, as a senior in high school, had a conversation with my youth pastor.
Okay.
And he pulled me aside and just asked me what I was doing with my life. And I was like, this is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Business administration. Want to go to Messiah College. And he had a long conversation with me and basically said that he saw gifts in me related to ministry.
Okay.
And then, honestly, within the next 2 weeks, unrelated conversations, people started talking about ministry.
Wow.
And really got me thinking, is this a coincidence? What's going on here? So I actually went to school kind of with a business fallback as a minor, was what I was thinking.
Okay.
But I was Christian education. That's what I declared, and wanted to be a youth pastor.
Wow.
So for 4 years at Messiah, I was in the Biblical Religious Studies department. I'm a humanities product.
Okay.
And loved what I was doing. I was also the youth pastor at Dillsburg Brethren in Christ Church.
All right.
And I really came to love people and came to love the connections with people and how people make meaning.
Okay.
That was really, really important to me.
Yeah.
So fast forward, after my work in the church, after I graduated, I was about 4 years doing ministry and church work.
Okay.
And then I came back to Messiah as a residence director.
Wow.
Do you know what a residence director is?
They manage the spaces in which people live.
Yeah.
Maybe a specific building or floor or whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of like a live-in pastor, sort of.
Okay. Yeah.
Slash disciplinarian, slash everything else. But it was great. I loved it. I did it for 4 years.
Okay.
And then I worked and pivoted to development, where I was managing a grant on vocation that was through the Lilly Foundation.
Okay.
It was a $2 million grant.
Wow.
And we were exploring what vocation meant for Christian institutions,
Okay.
Faith-based institutions.
Yeah.
The Lilly Endowment gave out $2 million to 88 schools across the country.
Oh, wow.
So we were part of this great cohort, and I really loved it, but you can't engage in something like that and not start to ask questions about your own vocation.
Yeah.
So I started to wonder, why am I still in Christian higher ed? And landed on, I'm there because I want to serve God and I want to serve people.
That's so cool.
And I think the purpose of education is to serve. So I was privileged enough to be able to apply for the position of the director of the Center for Service Learning.
Okay.
And I got it. And I worked there for 10 years directing that center.
Wow.
And it was through that I was building partnerships on behalf of the institution.
Okay.
And that's where partnership planners came from, trying to solve a problem in our own workflow.
Yeah.
Towards the end of my stint at Messiah, I was involved in a federal initiative through the Obama administration.
Yeah.
Called Together for Tomorrow.
All right.
And the purpose of that was to figure out how institutions of faith can come alongside struggling public schools.
Wow.
And support student achievement.
Yeah. Yeah. So important.
I love that.
Yeah.
And really I took a deep, deep dive into public education in Harrisburg and started to feel called to build capacity in the school. And while I love the college, there was a lot of great things going on there. And
Right.
I felt like it was time for me to move into capacity building work. So honestly, like the pivot out of higher education was one of a continuation of a calling to serve.
Yeah.
And it just started to use the technology and the database infrastructure to support capacity building initiatives outside the college, in the community. And then doing more intentional work in schools, which is where we started the Foundry Makerspace.
That's really cool. So you've gone through several seasons of life in which you're going, for right now, I'm a youth pastor. And then you go in and you're like, now I'm kind of like a campus pastor. You're on the campus, and then you transition into the place of business and how things flow and getting into the community, which is just an extension of ministry. And now you're doing it at a larger level where you're combining what's happening at the local level in schools with business. We're going to dive into all of that in a little bit in segment 2. So we're definitely going to come back to that. But it sounds like for you, this journey has been one of unexpected turns, and where you're thinking you're going one direction and now you're going a different one. throughout that entire history, throughout that entire time and all of those seasons, maybe can you tell us one story where you just look and you go, I find significance in what I'm doing and seeing the impact that I'm making, either at a business level or an education level or even in the life of youth?
Yeah. So, I mean, anytime that light bulb goes on for somebody and a connection is made or they make connections with something, that really fires me up. So, for instance, I taught a little bit when I was at Messiah.
Okay.
And I had a student in my class.
Yeah.
And she was really struggling with some of the real difficulties overseas, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, and the poverty and famines that were plaguing many communities.
Yeah.
And she felt like she wanted to drop out of school. And we talked about that, the sense of she really was struggling with this urgency of suffering in the world.
Yeah.
And trying to make sense of like, well, why am I here learning about theory and learning about power and learning about these, kind of abstract things? I really feel called to serve directly. And she was of a particular theological tradition that was more, I'd say, Pentecostal.
Okay.
And so she really understood terms like the Holy Spirit and the devil and things like that.
Okay.
And so in her conversations with me, I just looked her in the eye and I said, did it ever occur to you that maybe the devil's trying to cut your head off?
Okay.
And she's like, no. What do you mean by that? And I said, well, really, quite frankly, if you can separate your head and your heart and your hands, then you're really disempowered and disembodied.
Okay.
And part of what I think education is doing is trying to put those things back together again.
Okay.
So we need to use our head, we need to use our theory, we need to use our hands, and we need to be guided by our heart. But those things need to be connected. And when we make those connections and when we understand why there is, the geopolitical forces that are at work that cause poverty.
Yeah.
When we can understand the issues with aid and international development work, then we can really start to move the needle on some of the biggest questions and issues we face. But we can't do that without real serious reflection of connecting our head, hands, and hearts.
Okay.
And so when I see that happening in ministry, when I see that happening in service, and when I see that happening in schools where kids are, particularly through project-based learning, they're making something, and all of a sudden they have this sense of like fulfillment. Like I did that, I made that. I can see they're like the lights coming on, and there's an empowerment that goes on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the things that really get me up in the morning. It's that sense of making connections and aha moments.
Wow, that's powerful. As you're doing that, you are impacting many people around you at different levels. In those moments where you're in what you're doing, it's so easy to be distracted by the everyday things. How do you take those times where you can really see the need, see the conversation that should happen, and make sure that it happens when you're talking to a student or a business leader or a community leader?
Yeah, so really listening is, for me, the key on-ramp into those connections and to making those connections. Because you got to understand where people are coming from, what they're wrestling with, what's going on in their lives, and what they're facing, what they're up against.
Yeah.
So for the private sector, they're up against certain things that may not be all that different from what higher ed is up against or what the church is up against, but they'll frame it differently. They'll use different words. They're in different communities of practices and contexts.
Right. They have their own lingo.
That's exactly right.
Way talking and communicating to each other.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So when you listen and you can kind of distill like, hey, this person's speaking this language.
Right.
Like my student was speaking some of what they call Christianese.
Yeah.
When I can pick up on that and I can use that language to make the connection.
Right.
Then that's powerful.
Right.
But if you flip the script and think about like social enterprise and social entrepreneurial work and impact indicators and how people are making the connections through big data and how you're moving the needle on all those catchphrase kind of things.
Right.
Then, sometimes people can really feel as though, one, they're heard and understood.
Yeah.
And then two, the things that you're really sharing with them are coming from a place of understanding and coming from a road that's been traveled before.
There is much, much more to this episode with Chad Fry. Head on over to jumbleThink.com. You can check it out at Season 2, Episode 52. You can also find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. In a moment, we'll be back to continue our look back at some of our favorite guest interviews as we continue the conversation with our friend, Jonathan Grabowski. We would love to connect with you, and there are many, many ways to do it. The best way, head on over to jumbleThink.com. You can find our links to Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. You can also find where you can sign up for our newsletter. That way you are always in the know of exciting things happening here at JumbleThink. While you're there, drop me a note. I would love to hear your story of chasing big ideas and dreams. You can also email directly to me at hello@jumbleThink.com. Now let's jump into our final segment as we talk to Jonathan Grabowski. In our final segment, we are talking to Jonathan Grabowski. Jonathan took his marketing agency and morphed it into an on-demand graphic design business. This transformation was fueled through travel, collaboration, and a culture of fun and feedback from his clients. Jonathan shares how you can harness this power to transform your own entrepreneurial journey into a stronger business. Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, Michael, it's an honor, and I love it when people say my last name. It's always like at a question mark. It's like Grabowski. I hope I'm saying that right, but no, it's an honor to be on the show. You nailed the last name pronunciation. Let's get right to it, man.
Cool. So we always like to start out the podcast by learning about your backstory. So tell us a little bit for where you are today, what your role in Penji is, what you do, and how that fits into the ecosystem of what you're building.
Yeah, so I'd say I'm everything, as I'm sure a lot of people explain on podcasts as far as what it is that you do. And when you say I am everything, it's not like an egotistical thing. I just wear a lot of hats. Yeah. I'm the janitor at some point in time. I'm the person, the decision maker, the marketer, the ads management. And it's not just necessarily because we don't have people in these roles, but you kind of have to put your brain into these little pots. Because you want to make sure that everything that is being done is done effectively and efficiently. And so right now, as a growing startup, we have about 34 people inside of Penji at this moment. And wow. We're just like a well-oiled machine. We're developing a lot of systems, processes, et cetera, in order to just fine-tune what it is that we're trying to accomplish here at Penji.
Systems and processes are so important, especially as you scale up. I mean, when I ran my agency on the West Coast, we didn't have a team as large as yours. We had a team of 12 to 14 people at any given time. But those systems, those processes were the lifeblood of keeping things sustainable from a management of project standpoint, from a deliverable standpoint. As you've kind of gotten your business going, systems and procedures, while they're the lifeblood, are often one of the last things we do or the hardest things we put in place. So tell us a little bit about that process of making your business sustainable through the processes that you're building.
Yeah, I'd say it's still a work in progress. A lot of people believe that you have to have the right process in order to continue to move forward in your business. And I would argue that that's not exactly the case. Yes, processes and procedures are important, but you also need to be able to actually do the process and not just create it. And I think that's a huge differentiation that we in particular have. We don't have to have the perfect thing, so to speak. We are just constantly going out and doing. And we even did that when we first started Penji. When we first started, we were an agency very similar to what yours was. We did graphic design, we did web development, we did app development, SEO. I mean, we did so much stuff. Yeah. And when we originally created Penji, it was actually a tool that we used internally to scale, so to speak, like our own internal design process. So what would happen is that people would come in and they'd say, hey, I need a slider image for my website. We would do the slider image, but then we would send it in an email. And then the email gets lost, and then you have to go back in time when somebody comes up to you and says, hey, remember that thing that you created like 6 months ago? Yeah, we want that exactly done. And then you're thinking like, what the heck is this person talking about? Like, how can you go back in time in 6 months? I have to go through my entire your search query on my mail in order to find this out. And so then there's the revision aspect, right? Where it's like, yeah, I think I want to do this instead. And I don't really like that little swirl that you did on the banner ad. I'm just like naming things, but you kind of get the idea. It can get cumbersome. So, we created the tool, and the tool ended up being what Penji is today. And it's been able to help a lot of people just because of that process, because of that simple procedure. Yeah, hopefully I answered that correctly.
Yeah,
I kind of went on a tangent.
Yeah. Now, for you mentioned that Penji was kind of birthed out of the agency, the design firm that you had. For you, let's go back even further. When did you're what, in your late 20s, I would guess?
29, yes.
29. All right. So you have a lot of years behind you now. In this process, a lot of things have changed, evolved, but where was that origin story for you to say, I like design, I like collaborating with other people, I like working with people to design something that captures them? Where did that whole passion for you start? When did that start?
Yeah, so I'll give you the honest truth. I am no developer. I am no designer.
Okay.
I can't do any of those things. In fact, I'm actually really bad at a lot of things. But something that has always been true has been this self, I guess, motivation to empower the next generation of entrepreneurs. And that's through education and community. And when I first started business several years ago, my first entrepreneur career started at 14, and just mowing lawns and stuff like that. And that's like the typical young male story, so to speak. That's kind of been overplayed at this point. But when we launched our design agency, we actually made so many mistakes early on that we kind of wish that we had mentors and tools, and there's just so much noise that it was really hard to, I guess, get a grasp on what actually makes sense. And I wish that there was somebody that could just guide us and to provide that level of just expertise, that tool that kind of just makes things a little bit easier. And that's been like the overarching theme to, I guess, my personal career in entrepreneurship, is trying to find ways to help people. And that's being done through the podcast, that's being done here in the city of Camden, where we do a lot of giving back. My co-founder has a very an amazing fundamental view of just education. About education should be a birthright to every person in the world, and unfortunately it's not. And so combining the two powers, so to speak, and the philosophies that we both believe in, and then putting that into a company that's also profitable, where we deliver a service, but we have this core value where we want to be able to help people. I'll give you a quick example. All of the people that we hire in the United States are actually from the city of Camden, New Jersey. And so we try to find ways to give back to our local community by providing jobs and internships to them, so then they can make their community better by the money that we give them in terms of compensation, the knowledge that we give them in order to one day maybe make their own business, so they too can be profitable at whatever it is that they do. That is something that is incredibly important to us. And it didn't always start that way. Going back to the question of the origin story, I think in the very beginning of our entrepreneurship career, we were very, very selfish. We always thought about money. We always thought about that one thing, like that next contract. And then we got that next contract, and we got that contract again. because we asked for it. We put it out into the universe and we got it every single time we asked for it. But it was never enough to make us something that we wanted, that we were proud of, so to speak. And now with Penji, we aren't necessarily fixated on the next contract. We're fixated more so on the next opportunity that we can help somebody, that we can help an entrepreneur, that we could help a business grow. And just that fundamental shift in mindset has revolutionized our business, and it has allowed us to grow without having that pressure of like, when's the next contract coming?
I think that's so important that you talked about the mindset shift for you. And it sounds like your even value system of what you value as an individual, as a company, has shifted in that journey. So for you, as you've processed over the last couple years, how you've done it in the past, how you're doing it today, and you're really building a new brand since 2017 in this Penji brand, how has that value system really brought you to a place of saying what we do matters, what we do is significant, it has purpose for you as a business, for you as an individual that has done this transformation to say we really evaluate what matters to us? How do you find that fulfillment?
Yeah. I mean, so for the most part, I'd say that when you build a selfish company, or when you try to build a selfish company, you too, in turn, you are the selfish one building the selfish company. And so you need to be able to change, again, what you mentioned, changing the mindset, and focus more so on the other person and not on yourself, because you can even see that in your advertisements, right? If you're spending money on advertisements, is this ad about you, or is this ad about why they need the service, or is this service about how they can benefit from using your service? That's just like one simple thing, right? From an internal perspective, with what it is that you do within your team members, we have the luxury of having a pretty relatively awesome sized team. And are you communicating with them? Like, are you talking to them? Are you finding out what they like? Are you finding out what their dreams are? And are you actively trying to help them pursue their own dreams? Because you won't know that until you ask them the question. And it doesn't have to be as direct, like, hey, what is your dream? Because I ask that question on my podcast all the time, and it's very direct. But it also gets them to think about it. But you can find out what that person cares about just by asking simple context questions. And then once you find out what's important to them, then you can have like a memory block, or even you could write it down if you really wanted to, and remember it. And then just constantly be aware of that and say, well, okay, this person cares about money, right? I'll just give some examples. This person really cares about money. What can I do daily to just help them achieve their goal? Is it sending them an article? And this doesn't have to be every day, but maybe once a week or so, send them an article about finances, like how to maintain your finances. When it's due for a raise, what are you giving them? Is it something that they are comfortable with? But what happens if somebody else that works for you wants to be an entrepreneur one day, and they want to be an owner of a business? Well, take them under your wing a little bit and show them what it really is like to be an entrepreneur. So I think the theme that I found in particular, is that it's not about you anymore. And it never was about you. For the longest time, I always thought it was about me. It's not about you. It's about helping other people.
Wow, that's really powerful. What's one challenge that you're currently working to overcome at Penji?
This is something that's just now, like right now, so I'll speak to it right this very second, is just the aspect of getting more people to be a part of your service. We had the luxury of getting over 250 paid customers throughout the course of our nine months so far. What is it, 9-ish, 10 months? And that is something that we're incredibly proud of. And everything that we did in the very beginning was completely unscalable. It wasn't necessarily like this incredible process. We just went ahead and we did it. We went ahead and we put ourselves out there in those really awkward situations, and we made the most of it. And from that point on, we got referrals and introductions, and then we dabbled into advertisements. And so like the biggest struggle now is finding the best way to scale the process. And we're in the process of scaling the process, but it's a lot of fine tuning. It's a lot of, I guess, upkeep. It's a lot of like looking at the numbers. And I think that is to the question, I answer it, but I also want to be able to give advice too, is we wouldn't be able to be on this path if it wasn't for us looking at our numbers. And if it wasn't for us looking at where our customers are coming from and how long they're staying, et cetera. We're a technology business, and we rely heavily on our website and our technology. And so if people aren't signing up, well, why is that? If they're not staying as long, why is that? If they're coming from means that revolve the internet, whether it's like Facebook marketing or Google, whatever it is, how can you invest more money into those channels to double, quadruple, and so to speak, 10x your output? So the struggle is just like, there's so many channels to partake in sales, but you need to be able to we need to be able to just better work out the kinks of the scalable, to make it a scalable process.
For sure. Now, what's the biggest goal, or the next big goal you have for Penji?
I won't say it just because I don't really know who's going to be listening to this, but I will answer it in a more creative fashion.
Okay.
We at Penji, we have a milestone sheet on our Google Drive, and every single month, actually that's not true. We have dates, and some of the dates are July 1. By July 1, do this. By August 1st, do this. I have to, I'm almost positive we didn't do August. That's why I'm hesitant. But it went from July to September, and then October, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we have milestones that we have to uphold every single time. And we look at it periodically, and to make sure that we are there where we want to be in our business. And if we're not there, we kind of use that as motivation. So we think to ourselves, all right, well, we have 2 weeks in order to accomplish this task. Where are we? What are we doing? How are we doing? Like, what's going on here? And so that added pressure as a company, and even employees and team members putting that pressure on me to achieve that goal. And we're very, I guess, cognizant of those, but we also are very transparent that we tell the whole team what those goals are. So it could be a financial goal, could be like, hey, let's redo the website, or whatever it may be. We have these goals, we have them listed out, and we look at them almost regularly.
There is much, much more to this conversation. You can check that out at jumbleThink.com. That is season 2, episode 60. It is a really fun episode, so go back and check that one out. In a moment, we'll be back to wrap up today's episode. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to encourage you, go on over and check out Podcast Row. I would love to have you join me and some of my friends to be on our show. So head on over to podcast-row.com to learn more about that and to apply. We want to thank Penji for sponsoring today's episode. You can get 15% off your first month of unlimited graphic design at a low monthly subscription. Head on over to Penji.com. Use the code JUMBLE, JUMBLE, to get 15% off your first month. We also want to thank OpportunityInChina.com. Whether you want to teach or learn abroad, you should go connect with them. You can do that at OpportunityInChina.com. Chasing big ideas and dreams is often hard to do, but it's worth it. And I believe you were created for something awesome. So today, I challenge you. Take the stories from our guests on today's episode. Let them be a fuel to help you move forward and take a step, a small step or a big step, but any step to take those dreams and ideas and make them a reality. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Now it's your turn. Dream big and change the world around you.
Cherchez la meilleure position. Les bras et les jambes légèrement espacés. Étirez-vous doucement, mais complètement. En avant, en arrière, sur les côtés. Vous êtes une autre personne. Les mères de famille, les enfants, peuvent également prendre un moment revitalisant. Dans quelques mois, lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps, vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.